is right at 7:30, and since I know that lots of you have places to go, and all of our time is valuable, let's get started here. So thank you all for being here promptly for the 8th annual Tom and Ann Sinkowitz lecture on Roman archaeology. We're thrilled and honored that Dr. Peter Foss is delivering this year's lecture, and Jen Rossetti will introduce him shortly. But I would first like to explain the lecture and introduce the honorands of the lecture and also Jen. First, for those who do not know me, I am Bob Holscher-Simmons, Professor and Chair of Classics at Monmouth. Now to the lecture. Please see the back of the program, which you all should have, for a picture of its honorands. The Thomas and Ann Sinkowitz lecture on Roman archaeology was instituted in 2017. In May of that year, Dr. Tom Sinkowitz retired from Monmouth College after 33 impactful years as Minnie Billings Chair of Classical Languages at the college. This lecture was endowed by an anonymous donor to support the annual archaeology lecture series sponsored by the Monmouth College Department of Classics and the Western Illinois Society of the Archaeological Institute of America. A little about Tom and Ann. During Tom's career, he taught a wide range of classics courses, many with strong archaeological features, including classical mythology, the ancient family, and Africa and the ancient world. In 1984, he founded the Western Illinois Society of the Archaeological Institute of America, which, since its inception, has hosted hundreds of archaeological lectures at Monmouth. Ann Sinkowitz, too, who earned a PhD in French from Johns Hopkins University, has been a loyal supporter of archaeology, an insightful conversant in question and answer sessions, and a host of countless speakers through the years at her and Tom's house. Tom and Ann could not be here tonight. They had a conflict, and so we're not able to be present. So we'll just honor them in their absence. A few more things about Tom, since I worked with him for my first 3 years at Monmouth. He is one of a select few people who earned all 3 of Monmouth's highest honors for faculty members at Monmouth, the Hatch Prizes in Teaching, Scholarship, and Service. He's been granted Lifetime Achievement Awards from nearly every significant classics organization in the state, region, and nation. He was Secretary-Treasurer for 8 years of the Classical Association of the Middle West and South, and before that, the Executive Secretary of Eta Sigma Phi, the National Undergraduate Classics Honor Society, for which he still serves on the Board of Directors. And on and on. His fingerprints are all over Monmouth College in the field of classics. It is a pleasure to have this opportunity annually to remember Tom and Ann as we hear from exceptional speakers in the field of Roman archaeology. So that is Tom and Ann. Now for Jen Rossetti, who will be introducing tonight's speaker. Jen is a junior, double majoring in classics and English. She's an initiate into the Eta Sigma Phi Honor Society for Excellence in Classics. She's a winner of the Don Strauss Prize for Excellence in Classics, Vice President of Philanthropy for the Alpha Xi Delta sorority, tutor of Latin and Greek, and a classic student worker, as well as a tutor in the Writing Center, one of the critical planners and executors of our multi-award-winning Classics Day in 2023, our hosting of the national meeting of the Eta Sigma Phi Honor Society also in 2023, and are hosting at the Illinois Classical Conference meeting just a few weeks ago. Along with Jimmy Welchie and Lynn Reck, she presented a paper at the conference on research that the 3 of them did, supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, for the Humanities, in a transplantation and other migration of populations in the ancient world. Now to introduce our speaker, Jen Rossetti.
Dr. Peter W. Foss is Professor and Chair of Classical Studies at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, where he has taught 42 different classes since he began there in 1999. He is also the author of Pliny and the Eruption of Vesuvius, which was published by Routledge in 2022, and co-editor of The World of Pompeii, which was also published by Routledge, but in 2007. As a scholar, he is primarily an archaeologist who works on the ancient Bay of Naples and landscape archaeology. He is currently co-director of the Trasimeno Regional Archaeological Project area, but he has also done field work in Greece, Turkey, Tunisia, and Italy. He received his PhD in classical art and archaeology from the University of Michigan, but he is also a product of the liberal arts. He earned his BA in classics and chemistry from Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota. He has continued that liberal arts streak of broad interest and development of the whole person, as evidenced in his being a black belt in karate and having been a youth soccer referee for years. Delivering this year's Sinkowitz Lecture on Roman Archaeology, please welcome Dr. Kedar Foss.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to try to figure out how to put the right source up. There we go. And I'm going to try to use my regular teaching voice. Is that okay? Because I kind of want to move around a little bit. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. I sound better than I actually am. You'll just have to put up with what's here. I'm going to start by thanking everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank the Sinkowitzes for making this lecture possible. I want to thank Bob for the invitation and the kind reception that I've received, and a darn fine meal downtown. So thank you one and all. I never read talks from pieces of paper, but this particular talk, I'm going to be doing that because of the intricacy of the argument that I'm trying to make. Okay? So that is by way of introduction. We should start. We're going to be talking about the date of the Vesuvian eruption. So I think it's time to loosen up and get going, right? Okay. As they say in Naples, va boom, yum. It's okay, let's go. Now, what I'm talking about results from a 9-year research project to study a famous volcanic eruption that happened in AD 79. We know about this eruption primarily through 2 letters written by someone named Pliny the Younger. Pliny saw the eruption firsthand when he was your age, college students. Okay, well, a little younger. He was 17. Okay? And it was a very big eruption. The volcano destroyed Pompeii, Herculaneum, and many other settlements, changing the topography of the Bay of Naples forever. And I'm going to note a few key places that will be important in our story. Okay? So Pliny the Younger, who wrote about this eruption, was here we go, here at Mycenae. Mycenae was the headquarters of the Western Imperial Navy for the Roman Empire. And his uncle, as we're going to find out, was the commander-in-chief of that Navy. So that's the Navy base, okay? The eruption of Vesuvius destroyed lots of places around Bay of Naples, most famously Herculaneum and Pompeii, but there were also other smaller settlements around, Stabii, Plantus, Pastoriale, Terzigno, which were also affected. So it was big, okay? It was very, very big. Time to meet the Pliny family. Pliny the Younger, he was a lawyer, politician, and author. As I noted, he witnessed the eruption firsthand and later wrote about it in 2 letters to his friend, the historian Tacitus. Maybe some of you have read some Tacitus. Young Pliny's uncle, Elder Pliny, author of the Encyclopedic Natural History, one of the most important works of science and reference in the entire Middle Ages, as I said, was commander of the Western Imperial Fleet. He died in the eruption. Okay? The 3rd member of the family was Pliny the Younger's mother, who was the elder's sister. And we don't know her name because nobody bothers to say. Well, let's read some of the first letter that Pliny gives to us. And I'm going to do it from a late 9th century manuscript. It's probably the best preserved manuscript that we have. It's in the Medici Library in Florence. All right. My uncle was at Mycenae, was commanding the fleet in person. On the 9th day before the 1st of September at about 1 p.m., my mother indicated to him that a cloud of unusual size and shape was appearing. Okay, they don't mention her name, but who's the one that actually sees the eruption? His mom, right? Who's paying attention to the world. All right. So, he goes on. This cloud was arising, whose resemblance and shape no other tree than a pine tree could have portrayed. For having been raised up high upon an extremely tall sort of trunk, the cloud was spreading itself out into something like branches. I believe because, having been carried forth by a fresh blast and then forsaken by that diminishing force, or maybe overcome by its own weight, it was dissipating to the sides, sometimes white, sometimes dingy and flecked, according to the earth or ash it had carried. Okay? Well, Pliny the Younger is quite observational, right? He's trying to figure out why the cloud looks the way it does. We would call that today what kind of cloud? A mushroom cloud. The same sort of cloud that you get in an atomic blast, and it's because the cloud gets to a certain level of the stratosphere, and then it's contained by the stratosphere and the high-level winds that are up there, and so it can't really go up any farther, and it sort of spreads out. It's typical shape, and it looked like the famous pine trees, which still dot the Bay of Naples today, which you can see in that picture. So, as I mentioned, Pliny the Elder, young Pliny's uncle, is going to die in the eruption. Why? Why does he die? Why does he have to die? Well, it's because he's the commander of the fleet. He has to do something, right? So his first thought is, I'm going to go and study it. So he orders the ship to be brought up, and he's ready to set out so he can write about it, because he's actually talked about volcanoes in his big natural history, which he just published 2 years before, but he's never actually seen a volcanic eruption, so he's pretty curious, right? Who wouldn't be? He's going to go study it. And as he's about to set out, he gets a message from someone living somewhere on the coast, we don't know exactly where, and she says, "We're trapped, rescue us, please." And then so Pliny, the Elder, decides, now I have to rescue people. That's going to be my mission. So he gets a bunch of ships together, and he sails out along that red line that you're looking at towards the volcano. And by the time he gets there, there's so much debris in the water that he can't actually even land. Right? Stuff's coming down thick and fast on the shore, and he can't land and help anybody else. So he says, well, I'll just go to my friend Pomponianus down here by Stadii, and I can study and watch it from there, because obviously I can't really help. Okay? There's no way for me to do anything. We think he probably sent out some contingents to land on the shore. We have some evidence at Herculaneum of a beached boat that's overturned and a soldier next to it that may be from one of the rescue missions that was there to evacuate some, but they died because they got caught by a pyroclastic density current. You know what a pyroclastic density current is? It's a superheated flow of gas and debris and ash and poisonous stuff that comes out of a volcano, and it travels 200 miles an hour, and it's like 500 degrees. So, yeah, it's basically death in motion. Don't worry, if you ever see one, you can't outrun it, so you might as well just stand there and wait for it, okay? Unlike that Jurassic World movie where they do run from a pyroclastic density current, jump over a cliff into the water. Not gonna happen. All right. So I'm going to read a little passage here about what Pliny the Elder says about the eruption when he gets to Pomponianus' villa down there on the coast. Okay? Now, it just so happened that all the wind was blowing this way. So it looked like that would be a safe place to be. Everything was heading east and south, and it looked like that spot where Pomponianus was, that'd be all right to look at the eruption. So, he says, from many places on Mount Vesuvius, exceedingly broad flames and towering fires were blazing, their lightning white brightness being made sharper by nighttime darkness. Very dramatic description of what was happening. But, Pliny the Elder stayed in the place too long. He stayed overnight, everybody in that villa was like, what should we do? What should we do? The villa started to creak back and forth. They were worried that the roof would cave in from the accumulating ash. Was it safer to be inside? Was it safer to try to escape? Eventually, the next morning, they decided to take their chances outside, and they're all out on the beach trying to head west away from the eruption when the very last and biggest pyroclastic density current comes after them. And here we have a scene from a 19th century lithograph of all the people who were helping Elder Pliny, who was quite old and had breathing problems. He was asthmatic. They abandoned him right at the end, and he died, probably from asphyxiation. Okay? So that was the end of Pliny the Elder. And then Pliny the Younger, his nephew, spent the next few days trying to figure out what happened, right? Some of the people with Pliny the Elder survived in order to tell younger Pliny what had occurred with his uncle, and also his uncle was taking notes the whole time. So we think that those notes survived and were used by the younger Pliny in his own descriptions and letters. Okay, is that okay for introduction? Like the basics of what happened? Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. Now, strangely, despite the fact that the younger Pliny in this 9th century manuscript copy of the letter which I showed you tells us very clearly that the eruption began on August 24th, there has been confusion and controversy about the exact date for the last 600 years. Opinion has divided into two camps. Those supporting the traditional summer eruption, the August 24th eruption, and those in favor of a less precisely dated autumn eruption. And tonight, I'm going to propose a solution for this puzzle. Now, there are lots of different kinds of evidence at play, some more relevant and more direct than others. And this whole list, I'm not going to go through all of it because I'll be here till midnight. But if there's something on the list that interests you, you want to ask me about afterwards, I'd be happy to talk about it, and I have plenty of slides to support that. All right. What I'm going to focus on mostly is the history of Pliny's text. I should first note that the letters about the Vesuvian eruption are only 2 out of 368 letters in the whole collection of Pliny's letters. How did his letters survive? And how did they change from when he wrote them down to our own time? So to answer this, I need to describe a new collation of the Vesuvian letters. I need to construct a new stemma, or family tree, for the source tradition of those letters. I have to decipher a mysterious branch of that tradition called Theta, and discuss its implications for understanding the eruption date in the written sources. Specifically, can we figure out how options other than the traditional August 24th date have emerged and survived? And finally, I'm going to address some non-literary archaeological evidence for the date of the eruption. So that's what we'll have in our talk tonight. And again, if you want to ask about more of the archaeological evidence afterwards, I'm happy to take those questions. We're going to start with this concept of a stemma, a family tree. It's the array of written sources for any ancient text. From Pliny's original archetype, copies were variously made and distributed in his own time. But every time a new copy was made, there were errors that crept into the text. We can trace those errors, however. They help us reconstruct which manuscripts descended from which, and so determine as best we can what the original text was, what it said. Now, the traditional stemma for Pliny's letters, which you see up here, was developed between 1853 and 1963, and it divided into 8, 9, and 10 book branches. Basically, how many books of Pliny's letters survived in each one of those branches through the Middle Ages. They're otherwise known as Gamma, Alpha, Theta, and Pi, Beta. Of these, we have or know of specific texts that represent all the families. We have representatives of all those families, except one. the mysterious theta branch. I'm going to tell you that this family tree that you're looking up here is now woefully insufficient for us to figure out the date of the eruption. So I had to build a new stemma for Pliny's letters. To do that, I had to collect all the collect scans of all the letters in existence. There's 80 copies that exist in manuscript form of these letters. I found 79 of them. And the 80th is being held by a very wealthy family in France who won't let me see it. And you know why? Because they have so many houses across the world, they don't know which one it's in. They don't even know what continent it's on. Yeah. Anyway. I do know from other information that 80th manuscript that we don't have is late in date, and it wouldn't affect any of the results that I'm telling you today. All right. So I also included all of the printed editions of Pliny's text. I then collated them. That means compared them all side by side using this handy spreadsheet to indicate every single difference across every single one of those copies for the words in those two letters. I concentrated on words that were different. Some words are the same across all the copies. I didn't care about those. I only wanted the ones where there was difference. And adding those all up, I get a database of 170,000 entries that are all done by hand. It took over 2 years to do this. So you can tell I'm a fun guy. But the size of this sample, this is a big sample, folks. This is big data. I can use empirical stemmatology. What's empirical stemmatology? Well, it allows me to use analysis as well as traditional comparison, side by side, of textual readings to find groupings of certain manuscripts that are more similar to other manuscripts, and then find out if they're related, and then find out how they're related, and then find out how those groups are related to each other. And this was very helpful, but I had the help of a chemistry professor who knew R and could actually do all of that stuff for me because I didn't know how to do it. All right, so here's the new stemma. I'm going to scroll through it for you here. It includes every single text we have down to the present day. It's provisional because only as little as about 10% of all manuscripts have survived of Pliny's text. But as you can see up here, it's pretty complicated, the story of this text. It's very complicated. I won't take you through it all. I will take you through some key events, however. There we are, almost done. There we are. Okay, so very complicated. I'm going to start, we're going to focus on Italy, and we're going to be going to the 15th century, okay? Because in Italy, in the 15th century, there was only one manuscript of these, only one, that survived that had the letters about the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Only one. And we call that one Gamma. Okay? It didn't have books 8 or 10, but it did have the Vesuvian letters. Gamma was rediscovered in a library in Verona in 1419 and made a big splash. Everybody wanted a copy of this, so it was copied all over the place, so much so that the descendants of this one manuscript, which doesn't survive anymore itself, make up 95% of all surviving manuscripts for the Vesuvian letters. It's responsible for most of the manuscripts that we have. Two of its branches are really important. I'm going to talk about them today. Gamma 3b1, which you're seeing over there in the orange, which emerged in the late 1420s, and also a revision made by the scholar Lorenzo Valla in Naples around 1438. I'm going to talk about both of those specifically later on. But before we do that, I have to discuss the mysterious theta branch. Remember I said that we don't have any manuscripts that are theta manuscripts, right? So what is it? Well, back in the 50s and 60s, an Indiana University professor named Salatier Stout, it's a great name, first argued that a cluster of strange readings comprised a new family branch for the Pliny tradition, and he called it theta. Generally, his theory has been accepted, but no one actually knows what theta was or where it came from. I'm going to tell you the answer to that now. And in order to do that, I have to thank Michael Reeve from Cambridge University, with whom I worked. He's one of the manuscript gurus of the universe. And even in his retirement, he reached out and he had a zillion emails about this, and it was through his guidance, and most importantly, his rejection of my many hypotheses that finally allowed me to figure out what actually happened. So if you're wrong the first time, don't give up, right? Keep going. Okay, so let's see what theta actually is. To do that, I need to explain a term for you, and the term is annotations, okay? There's going to be two types of annotations. This is what happened when a scholar had two versions of the text side by side. They would often mark up or take notes on one version of the text based on what they saw in the other version, okay? Or sometimes it's just ideas that occurred to them, like, I wonder if it's this. I'm going to write it in the text. Okay. Sometimes these annotations are done right on top of the original lines. Those are called superlinear. I'll give you an example there. Sometimes they're done on the side of the page, over here. Those are called marginal annotations. You'll often find multiple sets of annotations in the same manuscript, which can be hard to sort out. So one of the things, in order to do this, that you have to learn how to do is to read and distinguish the handwriting of different scribes on these manuscripts. Okay, how are we doing? All right with the background? Because it's going to get really crazy now. We're going to go so far into the weeds. All right, but I'm going to take you along. I'm going to take you slow. We can do this. All right? We're going to explain what happened, what theta actually is. We're going to start in October 1453 in Rome, when a manuscript is copied. That manuscript is called Vatican Reg Lat 1472, or R 1472 for short. It belongs to that Gamma 3b1 branch that I noted earlier, okay? Okay, it had a descendant, a hypothetical descendant, which we call C naught. Now, it's common to posit hypothetical sources or texts from clues that are preserved in their descendants, right? They leave traces in their descendants, which are copies of it. Then we have to detour to Naples in 1438, to that other branch. This is Lorenzo Valla now. He's in Naples making lots of original conjectures about what the text should be. And he's a really good scholar. Oh my gosh. According to my sample, he was right 54% of the time with what the reading should have been. That's astonishing. So he's making his own personal copy with a lot of his ideas about what the correct text should be. And his personal copy itself had several important descendants, including something called LL52, which is in Oxford today. Now, Valla brought his copy from Naples to Rome in 1448. And there, the readings from his text were integrated and annotated into C naught, that hypothetical text that I talked to you about before, okay? And then integrated completely into its descendant, C. Because if you're annotating C naught, then when you copy C naught, you take some of those annotations and you build them in to the copy, which is C. Okay? You just fold it right into the regular text. All right. It's going to get even crazier now. Before, C was bound, because all the copying is done loosely, right? Individual pages. The very last thing you do with the book is you glue it and sew it and bind it and all that, right? That's the last thing you do. But before that binding occurred, missing letters from Book 8, preserved in some theta source somewhere in Rome, were added to the end of that manuscript and were labeled as Book 9 by the very same scribe. We know that because the handwriting is the same. Otherwise, other than that extra book, C doesn't have any theta readings. And C was special. It was a presentation copy to the young Francesco Piccolomini, who was going to become Pope Pius III. And he was big shot in making the Vatican Library, okay? World famous library, which I had the pleasure of going to and working in for a while. All right. Now, C naught also had another descendant called F naught, and it received annotations from theta as well. But it didn't get book 8 because it had already been bound. The pages had already been bound together. And a descendant of F naught, F, integrated those theta readings and then was taken to Naples. Another offspring of F naught, Q naught, was copied, but this time in conjunction with full access to theta, so it received additional theta readings, and the book 8 letters were put in the proper order in the text between books 7 and 9, which doesn't occur in any other of the texts. A presentation copy of Q naught, Q, survives today for us in the Vatican, and it was copied in the 1460s. Okay. All right, still here? Okay. Now, even cooler stuff's going to happen, or weirder stuff. Around 1474, Johannes Schuriner brought a printing press to Rome. A printing press! Major tech upgrade. Yes? He was wanting to prepare an edition of Pliny's letters. Now, another printing press, a rival, had already done this in Venice a few years before. It's a hot market for printed versions of the ancient texts, and so he wanted to be out there on the market and get some of that business too. So he was making a new edition, which we call R. Okay? And this, to make this edition, what did he use as his base text? Because if you're going to do a printing, right, you got to set all the type and everything like that. You have to have a text that you're actually working from. We know what text he was working from. It was that same R 1472, which was the parent to this whole shebang. Because it was in Rome, right? That's what he used, okay? And it was amended, right? All right, so he annotated R 1472 with readings from the theta source, which was still floating around Rome, and that amended manuscript became R naught. He then added the book 8 letters at the end of it, as book 9. So he didn't even have them in the right order either. The book 8 letters then joined the 1476 Naples edition. You can see everybody's competing to put these editions out, which also used F. R and theta then remained as sources for later manuscripts and printed copies. Okay. In sum, what Professor thought was theta was really a combination of Vala's conjectures, just his ideas, and a true and increasingly tattered ancient theta source someone had discovered in Rome and which is now lost. Every time that theta source got copied into a text on its way through the years, the readings are worse. They're worse and worse. That copy was not in good condition. You can kind of track its disintegration. All right, well, Professor Foss, that sounds great, but what does that have to do with the eruption date? For you may ask. Which is why I came to this darn lecture. Okay, I'm going to tell you. All right. Let's consider our oldest and best sources for the date of the eruption in the manuscripts, independently. They are the 10 and the 9 book families. Now, these 10 and 9 book families, nobody had seen them in Italy in the 15th century. Nobody knew they existed because they were Germany, okay, and in Paris. The 5th century manuscript Pi, which we have preserved in a printed edition of 1508, and also an extremely rare 1504 Beroaldus edition, which I luckily rediscovered in the St. Peter's, as well as 2 9th century Alpha family sources. They all read the same date. They all say the same thing. They say the 9th day before the calends of September was when the eruption happened. So our oldest manuscripts, our most reliable ones, all agree. That's cool. They all say August 24th. Why do we even have, well, I'll tell you why there's still an argument. But I'll have to tell you something about Roman dating practices. Right, not those kinds of dating practices. Okay? How do Roman dates work, right? Well, you have 2 flavors, basically, and for you Latin geeks, there's an ablative flavor and there's an accusative flavor. But the recipe is pretty similar. And now I'm going to duck over here because I'm going to draw on this thing. Oops. There we go. All right. So, first, you have to say the number of days before something. And in that case, we have 2 different words for 9. One in the ablative, one in the accusative. Okay? And that's okay, believe me, it's okay. If you want to ask why, I can tell you in detail afterwards. All right? The day before what? Day before a month marker. Romans had 3 month markers. The most famous is the Ides. Right? Beware the Ides of March. Okay? That's either the 13th or the 15th of a month. And you mark your day by the number of days before that. The calends is the first day of every month. That's easy. Of course, that's where we get our word for calendar. One of the very few words in Latin that starts with a K, if you're ever on Jeopardy. All right. Finally, the name of the month, which in this case is September. Right? So you're talking about the 9th day before calends, or the 1st of September, which, if you count backwards, is August 24th. Now, if you actually counted backwards, you would give me a different number than August 24th. And that's because the Romans counted inclusively. They counted both the beginning and the end number of something. So they always have a larger number than what we do when we count how many there are between 2 different days. All right. So that's what we've got for our pi family, our beta family, and our alpha family. Our best sources, they all agree. But for the gamma and theta families, the situation is very different. Those families, which shared a common ancestor, didn't even have a month name. It was the 9th day before the 1st of... There's nothing there. There was nothing there in that Gamma manuscript found in 1419 in that library in Verona. It just didn't make it. Okay? Now, the number nonum, or the 9th, is consistent across all key gamma subfamilies, except one. Except one. It's that 3b1. It's that pesky 3b1 subfamily. And in that family is the R1472 manuscript. Oh, this is how it all comes together. It's what the weeds, it made those weeds that we were just traveling through. In that branch, we don't see nonum. We don't see the number 9. We see something that is literally new. Literally new. Novum. It means new. Why did that happen? It happened because an ancestor branch had a reading that was ambiguous between nonum and novum. In scribal handwriting, in minuscule handwriting, N and U were easily confused because you're usually just doing these 2 downward strokes. And depending on whether you're going to put the downward stroke a little bit more up on here or a little bit more down here, it's going to read one or the other. That's all it is. Okay? Now, we can trace this error, actually. An ancestor in the branch we're talking about had a reading ambiguous between N and U. And it's a known copy made by Flavio Biondo. Good old Flavio Biondo. His copy does not survive, but its descendants do. And he made that copy between 1424 and 1425. We know this because of letters that were going back and forth between these copyists, talking about what they're working on. The surviving descendants of Biondo's manuscript read either nonum or novum. We get both coming out of that one. And one of those descendants is our old friend R 1472, which reads what? Just new, N-O-U. Okay, what's that? Now we have to decipher that. Let's go back to that diagram we built before. But now we're going to have readings for the eruption date built in there. Now, 72 is the key source, right there, okay? Originally, as I said, it read new, N-O-U. Now, U and V are the same letter in Latin, by the way. One's just a vowel, one's a consonant, okay? All right. Now, this is similar, this new reading. We see it in descendants that are influenced by Vala and Theta. We have this one here that has new there, right? There's one here, over here as well. So there are ones that look like that, okay? Now the new was definitely altered to November in R 1472 by the editor of the second printed edition, R, which we already saw, even though it's syntactically incorrect in Latin to have it rendered that way. I'm going to take an even closer look at this. We're going to bring the microscope down even further. Okay? All right. First, how do we know that the editor of that second printed edition, the editor of R, used R 1472? How do we know that? We know that because of a really big mistake, a spectacular error. The stylized U at the beginning of the Latin word usus, right here, was printed as zisus in the printed copy. Latinists, I ask you all, is there a Latin word, zisus? Nope, no such word. But the editor of the printed volume wasn't paying attention, or didn't care, or wasn't very good at Latin, any of those things. So they printed zisus, because that's what they thought they saw, and it appears nowhere else. Because anybody else who made a book after this saw zisus and went, what? And they fixed it, okay? But they had to have been using R 1472 as their exemplar that they were copying from in order for that error to appear in the text. All right. Not only that, R 1472 had a sibling, Lat 5881. Both of them were written in late 1453. They were both written at the same time. How do we know? Because they were both written by the same scribe. How do we know? Because he signed them. He told us. He told us who did it and when he did it. Yay, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Although he seems to have been using a different pen for each one of them. Now, he left a space after the new in his 1472. He left a space there. Why? Because he couldn't figure out what it was supposed to say. Maybe he would come back to it later and figure it out. When he got to 5881, he also left a space. Okay? He left a space there too. But he left it, and he said that that was non instead of new. So I think he did this one second. And by the time when he was thinking non is short for nonum, which is a number, and he knew it was a date, and that would make sense, because new would not make sense as a date. It just wouldn't fit anywhere. Again, the exemplar that he was copying from must have had some ambiguity. And later on, what happened? The R, right, added added EMB to R1472 because that's what he printed in the printed version that he was working on. He added it into the text, did a pretty good job. And you might say, well, how do you know? How do you know? Well, let's try to figure it out. So to figure it out, I went into the text of R1472, and I found all 41 examples of any word that had EMB, MBR, BRIS, or BRES. This took a while. Across the whole manuscript. Now the forward slanted shape and smooth edges, okay, of the original, I don't think match the upright stance and sharper nib of the R editor's emendations. Compare, for instance, the EMB of November in R1472, top left hand there, with the EM superlinear correction in a different letter just below. It's the same handwriting, and the superlinear correction was definitely made by the R editor because that's the reading that occurs in the printed text. But I have more evidence. We could compare Monenten here and the R editor's gloss above it, which also appears in the printed text. And finally, Sanbenentius' signatures, which just tell us that it was him who wrote it, but he gives us dates. Okay? And the way he writes and abbreviates November is with a B with a line slash to the top, October, a BR with a line slash through the top. This is a little poem he wrote a few years later. So he was consistent in how he abbreviated the dates for months. But that's not how the abbreviation for the date occurs in R1472, is it? So it's not him, because that's not how we abbreviated months. So, there we go. We can compare all of those, yes? All right. So the editor of R, okay, right here. The second printed edition in Rome in 1474. He's responsible for construing a reading of November and suggesting an autumn date for the eruption. And because he did it in print, even though it's syntactically incorrect, it's not right Latin, because it was in print, it kept getting reproduced and copied regularly until they discovered the older and less corrupt Alpha and Pi manuscripts in the early 16th century in Germany and in Paris, respectively. And once they found those older texts, everybody realized that those were better readings. They realized the mistake that was here, and everybody said, oh, it's August 24th. Okay? That should have been the end of the story. They had already figured this out by 1508. They knew. Okay? Thank you very much. No, it's not the end. Why? Why not? What happened? There should be no controversy whatsoever. Here's what happened. Editors of Elder Pliny's Natural History. So that's a really popular book because it's basically the history and it explains how the universe works and everything. It's really popular. So editors in the 16th century who were making versions of Elder Pliny's Natural History wanted to add something special to their editions. Like, okay, you published a nice edition of Elder Pliny's Natural History, but you know what? If I added some material at the front of it, you know, I could say that I've got stuff that you don't have. So I'm going to add in some letters about Pliny's life. So they added some of younger Pliny's letters as prefaces, as biographical background for Elder Pliny, so they could sell their editions. Okay. Now, it started in 1536 with a guy called Assulanus. He used an outdated 1506 edition of Cataneius' text that still read November. This is what Cataneius' printed edition looked like. And Assulanus didn't bother to look and see what was the most current version of the text, because he wasn't doing the letters of Younger Pliny. He was doing the Elder Pliny. He just grabbed an edition that happened to be there, and it was one that had an outdated text. Okay? Now, one of the descendants of Ocelanus's, because they're all copying each other, right? You know how we're on you all the time about plagiarism, students? Oh my God, were they plagiarizing? All the time! Right? Stealing books, selling them under their own name. It was pretty common. All right, one of these descendants, the 1608 Dallacampius edition, had an essay in it. Another special thing. Ooh, we've got this essay. And this essay is going to argue that Pliny was born in the town of Como in northern Italy. Who cares, right? Oh, did they care? They cared so much. Como rivaled Verona. What do we know about, what's famous about Verona? Romeo and Juliet. Yes, exactly. All right, so Como and Verona are competing with each other about who gets to claim they're the birthplace of the Plinies. This was common for Italian cities to fight over if someone was famous, okay? And in fact, what Como did in response, actually, in 1480, is when they built their new cathedral, they put statues of both Plinies on the front of their cathedral, which actually caused a big stink because they were pagans. You shouldn't be putting pagans on the front of your cathedral. Anyway, 1608, we get a lawyer from Verona who's upset about this claim that the Plinies were from Como. And he's upset about those darn statues on that cathedral. That should not happen. His name was, and this is a great name, thought about naming my kid this, but my wife said no. Polycarpus Palermus. Who doesn't want to be called Polycarpus? He said, no, Como. I'm going to write an entire essay about why they're from Verona. I'm going to prove they're from Verona. And in the process of this, he's trying to understand the lives of these two guys, and he wants to know, like when did Elder Pliny die? I'm talking about his whole life. When did he die? So in his argument, he listed dates for the second day of the eruption. The second day, right? The eruption starts on one day. Remember, Pliny has an overnight at his friend's house, a sleepover, at the villa, and he dies the next morning, right? So in his essay, he lists the second day of the eruption. And one of those dates he gets wrong. The third day before the nones of November was November 3rd, not the November 2nd he wanted. So he's a big-time lawyer, big shot, but he's not very good at Latin either. Okay. Compounding the error. Oh, boy, are we going to have some big mistakes here. Subsequent scholars mistook the death dates for the dates of the eruption. So at this point, in the early 17th century, there are 4 dates for the eruption in circulation, and 3 of them are clear mistakes. It will get much worse. A scholar named Harduinus mistook the death dates for eruption dates in his 1685 edition, still relying on that obsolete 1506 text. But, oh, this is my favorite. In citing Palermus, he used a footnote. And the footnote mark was then mistaken by a guy named Rosanico for another date, 1 Cal November, which is, it's just impossible in Latin. Am I wrong? It's impossible. Now we have 5 dates, and 4 of them are wrong. 1797, we get a priest named Rossini. He's been hovering around working with the finds from Herculaneum, which have now begun to be excavated, in the early 18th century. He's sort of doubting this August date based on what he's finding, even though archaeology wasn't even a discipline yet, and his reading of the evidence was simplistic. So he started looking for other evidence about the eruption date, and he found Cassius Dio, for you Greek fans. Cassius Dio wrote his account like 140 years after it happened, and we don't even have his original text. We just have 2 medieval summaries of it, epitomes. But in both of those, the same term for the date of the eruption is used, fthinoporon, okay? Which means literally the last part of late summer. But Rossini, following the French historian Diderot, incorrectly doubled the end part of the word, the thin, in translating fthinoporon as the end of autumn, rather than the end of late summer. This permitted him to start a trend of contriving one's own month to fill the gap of the Gamma family, right? Because remember, the Gamma family didn't have a month. He proposed the 9th day before the calends of December, which is November 23rd. And now we have 6 dates, and 5 of them are wrong. Rossini's invention of his favorite month inspired 2 volcanologists in 1929 to propose yet another date, October 24th. This one doubled the 9 from the 9th day into the month of November. And now we have options at number 7, and the more options you have, this is important to everyone, the more uncertain the textual a date appears to be. Right? So it's a vicious cycle. Now this question of the date was revived in the late 20th century. And today, the October 24th date circulates widely, especially after, in 2018, archaeologists found an inscription mentioning October 17th in the Casa del Giardino at Pompeii. Now the inscription doesn't have a year, it was indoors, it could easily have been on that wall for a while, but it's received a lot of press, so let's look a little more closely at it. I want to emphasize again that this inscription was done in charcoal. It was done on the wall of an interior courtyard, and it was definitely underneath a roof, as the excavators themselves admit. It was not exposed to weather, and it was not prone to being worn off because it was at head height. You can see the director of Pompeii there, Massimo Osanna, there pointing it out with pride. It caused a big splash in the press when it was found. It proves the eruption did not happen in August, they said. Now, while the entire text is not certain, there it is, in terms of its full translation, there is no doubt that it says October 17th. It does. There's no question about it. It says October 17th. But again, it doesn't have a year. So the question then becomes, how long had the inscription been on the wall before the eruption happened? Just a week, like the site director said? More than a year? When? The house in question, was definitely under renovation when the eruption happened. And it was also occupied during the renovations because they found the dead people inside the house, not far from the inscription. Osanna and others have argued that such an inscription would never have been tolerated to be on the wall of a house visible to the public while the house was in use prior to renovations, because it would have looked bad. So it must have been scrolled on the wall only during the eruptions, which were happening when the eruption hit. During the renovations, it would have been scrolled on the wall. Okay, that's the argument. However, work by Rebecca Benefield, among others, has clearly demonstrated that Roman houses, even wealthy ones, were not pristine places. It was really normal to have dozens of words and drawings, even obscene ones, etched on walls in visibly public areas of a home. In other words, there's really no way to prove that the October 17th inscription was made in AD 79, as opposed to some other previous year. It can't date the eruption. Now, in late 2022, after my book was published, 3 new studies came out related to the charcoal inscription and the eruption date. All of them concluded that charcoal inscriptions actually can last a long time, even outdoors for 60 to 70 years, because they compared ones that have been excavated at Pompeii for at least that long, and they're open to the and you can still read them. So that whole argument seems to have fallen apart. Now, maybe there is some evidence that it was known in August. What kind of artifactual smoking gun would work? What if you had an artifact that had a date on it? like, what do you think? An artifact that you carry around, daily life, might use it to exchange for goods and services, and it has a date on it. A coin, thank you, sir. A coin. What if there was a coin? Well, it just so happens that in 1974, a batch of coins was found with this tragic group of eruption victims at Pompeii. Now, just last week, they published DNA evidence about this group of people. They thought it was a family, and they always thought that that was a kid and that was his mom, and they were going, pyroclastic density current is hitting us. They probably didn't say that, I have to be honest. But now they've done DNA evidence, and they're not related at all. Okay, so much for that idea. Anyway, the initial publication for this one silver coin in this batch, you see a drawing there, showed a coin legend indicating a date after September 8th. This is a date, one of the honorific titles for the Emperor Titus. So if the coin was minted after September 8th, the eruption would have to be later than that, right? Are we agreed? That sounds like a pretty good smoking gun for proving that it didn't happen in August. However, in 213, this coin was sent to the British Museum for a museum display, and Richard Apty, their coin expert, took a closer look. He realized that the actual coin was in really bad condition. He realized that the cataloger and the artist both made mistakes and had misrepresented what was on the coin, and it's actually an issue from July to August of AD 79, not September. Now here you can look, the actual coin is in the center. It took me a long time to get this photograph of the actual coin. Okay, that's the actual coin. Okay, the drawing of it is above, and this is the same issue of the coin as that one that's not well preserved, and it has the right inscription on it. And we know that all it can do now is date the eruption to August or later, because the issue of that coin was July and August of AD 79. Oh. If I were to summarize, I could tell you that so far, no evidence from inscriptions, coins, wind direction, grape harvest, pine cones, pomegranates, fish sauce, or anything else has been specific enough, precise enough, and sufficiently indisputable to challenge what Pliny wrote. I mean, Pliny was there, right? I examine all the arguments and all the evidences in the book. But I admit that our understanding may change if we find new evidence, right? Maybe we will. Maybe we will find new evidence that challenges it. My main purpose here has been to show that Pliny wrote August 24th as the eruption date. And we don't have to warp what he wrote any longer, because now we can understand how those many errors crept into the literary tradition for the dates. That's what I was talking to you about tonight. Now we understand how the mistakes occurred. Future challenges to August 24th have to demonstrate that Pliny was just wrong. And we can't pretend that he wrote something else. Now, big picture, right? A 2-month difference in dates, who cares? Valid criticism. But it's true that we so rarely get an opportunity to pinpoint a precise moment in the past and associate it with physical evidence. That's really rare. So we may be able to use it as an index to refine various types of scientific dating methods. I also care a lot about methodology, quality of evidence, and precision of argumentation. So I hope that this has revealed how easily errors can work their way into received knowledge, and how widespread those errors can become, right? Oh, you might say, Dr. Foss, misinformation doesn't happen. That doesn't get repeated in society ever. Well, the contrived date of October 24th almost became standard. It had almost been widely accepted. The site of Pompeii was putting it on their websites and in their publications, but now the tide is turning back, and an email I got last year from the site director now says, Yeah, you're right. We're going to stop talking about October 24th and go back to talking about August 24th as the right date for Pliny's very bad day. I'll be happy to take any questions, and I thank you for your
Thank you so much. Because we're at 8:35, and hold on just a second. I know that a lot of people in here have a paper to write for me. Others have a class with me tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Others have a play, a dress rehearsal to get to. And others are hard-working Monmouth College students and community members. And for those who have to get going, at this point, you can skedaddle. But those who are able to stay around and ask a few questions and hear some more are free to stay around. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
So anyway, so everybody, you're free to skedaddle if you'd like, but if you're willing to stay around, you are welcome. So thanks for coming.